It's going to be an interesting conversation. It's going to be one, I would say, that is rife with opinions and ideas that have formed about the e-skimming problem over the course of the last couple of years, and specifically around where we've gone and what's happened in almost the last year since e-skimming controls were mandated under PCI DSS 4.0.1. So we're talking about, an e-skimming reality check. We've got here with me today some people who I think can provide, a boots on the ground kind of perspective on things. We've got Art Cooper from TrustedSec. You guys might know him as Coop, if you know him in the industry and seen him around. And we have Steve Maxwell from TrustedSec as well. And my name is Steve Ward. I'm with Source Defense. I'll talk a little bit about me and Source Defense here in a minute. Maybe let Art and Steve say hi and introduce themselves. And then we're going to kind of do this like sort of round robin style or panel style throughout the presentation. So Art, Steve, whichever one of you guys want to jump in, say hi and intro.
Go ahead, Steve.
Got you on mute, Steve.
And I'm back. I am Steve. And yeah, I've been at TrustedSec for 8 years with Coop. I've been in IT and security for decades. And I see a lot of people implementing this stuff and advise on a lot of it. So glad to talk about it today.
Art Cooper, most of you guys know me as Coop, and I was there to unencrypt the scrolls when Moses had to read them. So that's how far back in IT I go. It's ridiculous, actually. And I've been doing PCI since day one, and I still really actually enjoy it, even though it's not without its challenges. Looking forward to having a great talk today.
Awesome. Thanks, guys. I'm Steve Ward. I'm with Source Defense. I have my roots trace back to the dawn of PCI as well. I haven't been with it as connected for all the entirety of the. I guess where I'm going on maybe 20, where we at 21 years almost at this point in time, or 20, I think this year. But got a lot of history and experience with it. And in Source Defense, I've been here for multiple years, really laser focused on addressing the e-skimming threat. I'll give a little background on Source Defense. I think it'll provide some insight into sort of where we get off on having the opinions that we have about the subject. First and foremost, I think one thing that we're really, really excited about is the fact that we are partnered with MasterCard as their preferred partner to address the e-skimming problem globally. It was an announcement we made a couple of weeks ago. So we've got real deep connectivity at the card brand level. We believe in, this space is really about sort of changing the protective landscape from the mentality that we've had in security or that we've had in PCI of data in transit, data at rest. We think this is also ultimately about protecting data at the point of input. It's the new battleground. We'll get into, our thoughts on that as we go along in the session. It's a web security problem. It's also a third-party risk problem that I think has been woefully unaddressed when people think about, third-party risk management, TPRM, and the programs that they built. And so, we believe that, our role in Source Defense, partnering with some great names in the industry, is to really help round out security and close off the last mile, which has become a preferred attack pathway for the adversary. It's about data security. There's a data privacy element to it as well. I think that has escaped a lot of the conversation. We think about e-skimming attacks and we think about the ability of adversaries to grab data as it's being captured. There's also a lot of leakage that's happening because no one's watching the shop over all the partners that we have plugged into our website. And there's a lot of data, privacy related data, PHI and financial data that's being leaked out as a result. Ultimately, we're talking about compliance today, PCI DSS. So, that's a key focal point for what we do. But we have touches on GDPR, HIPAA, FFIEC as well. We are a PCI PPO, which means we're a principal participating organization. We are a SAC-D PCI compliant company, which means we're a service provider that has taken our own compliance seriously. And we are a member of the PCI Board of Advisors, where I sit on the Board of Advisors, and we'll go out to Salt Lake City next week for this quarter's meeting. So we're plugged in, we're there, we're integrated, we're talking, we're thinking, we're trying to educate. We got our finger on the pulse. We've been doing this for about a decade now. We've helped 1,000 of the world's largest brands, countless others in the small and medium medium sector. And so we kind of know what we're talking about in terms of the threat landscape. And, we have our vision, obviously, in terms of, protection. But today's conversation is ultimately about, not just our thoughts, because you kind of look at it and go, if it's coming from a vendor, it must be shill. But also incorporating, experiences from Steve, having a conversation and dialogue around where we stand. And I think the key takeaways that we hope you get from today's conversation is number one, that this is a problem that's not going away, and that while you may not see it every day on the news, it is something that is happening, across the payment ecosystem. Attacks are proliferating; they're gaining in sophistication. We did a pretty extensive review of 2025's threat landscape and have, I think, some real empirical data to point to that. We have a woefully inadequate adoption rate across the entirety of the ecosystem. And we've got empirical data on that. I think, Steve and Art will share some anecdotal evidence from their experiences as well. So we got a lot of movement still to be made. When we talk about controls and we talk about a standard like PCI DSS. It's public, it's knowledge, it's out there. Our adversaries are telegraphed as to what we're doing. And I think it's, traditionally, you're going to see an evasion of those controls happening. I think that's happening in terms of where the threat landscape is moving. I think there's also issues that we want to convey and get in your mind around the way we've documented the DSS and the way we've sort of prescribed or at least provided reference examples of controls that needs to be taken into account. We think there's a bit of a false sense of security that's being, created. And it's really important that you understand the nature of these attacks, that they are slow and low. They are designed, to not be noisy. In the vast majority of cases that we see from our perspective, what we see is, even a concerted effort on the part of the adversary to not skim every transaction, to skim at different times of day, to skim at different geographies, to skim, sort of in a very sort of sporadic kind of way, so as to avoid, major detection. And as a result of there being, poor adoption rates, we're seeing the average attack being in place and actually compromising sites for some period of 9 to 12 months on average, which is just ridiculous. And we need to do something about it. So that's kind of the setup. Okay. And what I want to do in terms of managing the session is we're going to introduce some ideas and some concepts. And I'm going to have some thoughts. Steve, Coops, you're going to have some thoughts, and we'll give you our thoughts. That's basically what it's all about. As we go along here, if we're saying things you disagree with, feel free to call us out on it. Throw something in the chat. We'll monitor that, and we'll pick and choose which ones we think we want to answer based on how controversial your opinions are. No, I'm joking, but we'll look at it. And if there's things you agree with, chime in as well. This is meant to be sort of, an open forum AMA kind of, no holds bar kind of conversation. So the first area that we, thought we'd talk to you guys about is what, the data is showing us about adoption rates in the industry and what merchants are doing or aren't doing as it relates to, putting these controls in place. And so I'll kick it off, with just something that we just concluded about a week ago, and then open it up and maybe get some thoughts. Steve, will start with you, and then Coop will go to you around what you're seeing, in your own engagements with clients, and maybe some of the things that you've heard and feedback you're getting from clients about, addressing a problem, right? Here's the first thing I'll throw out there is that we did an analysis week two ago, something like that, hang on, it's not moving my slide. Give me 1 second. There we go. Of about 10,000 websites around the globe. We didn't just, cherry pick, mom and pop or, the level 4 merchant or just cherry pick the level 1. Got a good mix. We looked at multiple geographies, 10,000 websites. And what we found, is that there's no side security or eSkimming security in place in roughly 95% of the sites that we scanned. Okay. So when we talk about the DSS and we talk about what happened with 4.0, 4.0 was released, keep me honest on this one, but I want to say like 2022, right around the midway point of 2022. There was a 2-year grace period that was provided for adoption of these controls, future dated requirement. That dated requirement kicked in almost a year ago, basically April 1st of 2025. And we still have 95% of the sites that we just scanned with no actual visible, implementation of any control to address the problem. We also found where controls were deployed that they were deployed inadequately. And so in the case of, CSP deployment, where we found it on these sites, it was deployed in monitoring mode, meaning, no violations were basically blocked. They were ostensibly logged, but, still a requirement there and not really in place, sort of like an auto, prevention kind of side of things. And roughly only 2% of the population that we looked at had any control in place at all. So that's our world. That's what we see, outside looking in empirical data kind of side of things. Steve, maybe talk to me and us, in here about kind of what you're running into, what your experiences have been, any lessons and learnings you've got from that, that can help educate people as to what's going on.
Yeah, sure. Glad to do. Again, mine would be anecdotal with the kind of dozens of implementations I've seen, not your thousands that your data is drawn from. I do have some customers or otherwise that attempted to be relatively on time with this. It's been required for nearly a year now to be in place. Most have not. Most have waited until their next assessment and then have to justify why it's actually effective and will be sustainably so when they really don't have a long track record with it working. Uh, the thing that I'm probably surprised most by is that many are wondering if they can roll their own, essentially using CSP and SRI, content security policy and sub-resource integrity, um, but haven't really shopped around the options. Don't really know how to size it up, both in total cost of ownership and what time it'll take to maintain this to be effective on their own, or with somebody like Source Defense. It's just not generally known. For those that have decided to roll their own, haven't seen them do the due diligence, which, as I'm going to make a case later here, they are obliged to find out from all of their third parties that provide scripts, as to the very best practices for securing them to be able to say that they're not susceptible to attacks. Merely having a CSP or an SRI is arguably can't be enough, period. But we haven't seen the due diligence to even try in many cases. Something that's beyond any kind of solution to just work upstream from all these threats is that some customers have wisely decided, I don't need all these third parties, and have greatly reduced the number of them on their payment pages and on their sites. They've been very judicious about what analytics to include. Some of them have thankfully looked at their content security policy and realized they have directives allowing sources they don't even use anymore, let alone have them tightened as much as they can be. So it's been a good exercise for at least getting the limited value you can be from there. I would recommend that highly to anybody. If you use Source Defense or anyone else, do question how many third parties you want to be there. Use less.
Yeah, I think that
Um,
that that point right there is an interesting one because if you really look at like what the first step that needs to be taken, behind the eSkimming controls is just know what you've got and then authorize and justify the fact that it needs to be there. And I'll speak to it from, my perspective as like a website owner for a long, long time or management, over sort of like the web infrastructure. Yeah, you come in a lot of cases and there's not this hygienic cleanup that goes behind just making sure like stuff that was legacy architecture or infrastructure is gone. Why do we need five tag managers or why do we need three analytics services? I didn't even know they were plugged into the site, right? And so that's
uh,
something that's really important. Coop, from your perspective, right? You made the joke that you've been around for a long, long time on this thing, right? Unencrypting the scrolls. What have you seen? Is this traditional in terms of like market uptick and adoption, for new controls when there's a major DSS change, or is this, outside of the ordinary? And what are you telling people? Like, what are you predicting? What needs to happen?
Yeah, so there is a pattern that we've always seen, and I go back to day one with version one, and I can remember when the most controversial requirement was 6.6. That was its number under the old system, and that was when we started telling people, well, you either need to put a web application firewall on here, or you have to do some type of testing to make sure that your website is not susceptible. But I don't know that the information was passed out as well. And the problem with it is first people complained because they didn't want to spend money on a WAF, and then people complained because they didn't really understand, well, what's the other testing I have to do? Because it wasn't explained enough. So that used to be a big one, and the adoption on it was very slow. And there were a couple of companies out there that started taking on these web assessments for the ones that didn't want to buy a WAF. And eventually we got there, but there was like a 3 to 4 year period where that was a huge fight, and that was kind of way back when. So when they first came out with version 4, and I saw 643 and 1161. Believe I have those right. I'm always worried I'm going to say 634,
You got
but
him.
it
You
is
got him.
six. Yeah, it is 643. And I was very glad to see that because that was the next step. I mean, it was one thing to get a WAF on there or to have people do assessments of their code. But this was more of an active catch. The problem is that the council really confused folks a lot when they made those changes to the SAC-A, especially when it was like 2 weeks before the
Yeah.
deadline last year, and they
Yeah.
they dropped the requirement for 643 and 1161. So the problem always with PCI, to sum it up, whenever anything new comes along, the first thing that we as QSAs get, how do I do this the quickest and the cheapest?
Uh-huh.
It's like that old cowboy movie, The Quick and the Dead. It's like they
Hmm.
want they don't think they're going to be alive tomorrow if they don't get something going now, but then they don't want to spend anything. They don't want to really understand what they're doing. They want you to tell them, well, Coop, tell me what to do. And so we've been going through that, and I'm very disappointed in the fact that we're at these levels. I think your data here, I can say anecdotally, it's exactly what I'm seeing in the field.
Yeah.
These
Yeah.
numbers are correct.
Well, so it's a fundamental argument between, that we always have between, compliance and security, right? And the must do and the should do, and the, the and I think losing sight of the why behind compliance requirements, right? These attacks have been happening since, 2016 is really when the emergence of like MageCart as a brand, kind of came
Mhm.
on market. And there was a tremendous amount of focus on it in the early stages because there were really big hits that happened, right? Big news was being made. It was before all the news, got sucked into the ransomware conversation for the right reasons. I mean, as security professionals on this call, obviously you have to focus on, the things that, could shut down the business overnight, right? And so I get the focal point there, but it's not like the attacks stopped. It's not like the attacks have slowed down, and it's not like the adversaries have looked at this and said, diminishing returns here. I'm moving to another category. In fact, it's quite the opposite based on what we're seeing in our research. And Scott, maybe you can throw a link as we talk, to the 2025 threat research report up in the chat so people can download it. But our research is showing like, an increase in volume, an increase in capability. Even Steve, to your point about like the minimization of services, the targeting of critical services like Google Tag Manager as an attack pathway, right? So everybody's going to have GTM in place, kind of thing, and also that. The capabilities, are outpacing even the adoption rates for the people who have done something related to PCI, right? And so, I think it's a struggle for those of you on this call. When you look at this and you say, well, it's mandated, I got to do it. I got some time to do it before my next assessment. My QSA's given me a pass, or I'm going to get there when I get there. Maybe this year that'll be a deficient control. I'll get, whatever. You're still leaving yourself widely susceptible to these attacks that if you don't even have a monitoring capability in place to understand if they're happening, it could be happening to you right now. It could be happening to you every 10,000th transaction on your website. And so, I'll get off my soapbox and see what you guys think. But that is that struggle that we always have to manage between mandate and, right thing to do from a security perspective. Steve, you got any thoughts on that one, or did I
Oh,
just
gosh,
bully
talking about the
pulpit
right
that?
thing to do. I mean, the right thing to do. We've commonly said that when working with compliance, that compliance and security aren't the same thing. And that for companies that are mature enough in their security to fully appreciate that, that compliance is just a well understood way to communicate what you've done.
Hmm.
That's transferable, communicatable to third parties. Awesome. But it shouldn't be your end goal. The difference between compliance and security with this area, again, given the sophistication and prevalence of the attacks, and the fact that this standard hasn't really changed in 4 years
Hmm.
as the hottest attack area, the difference between compliance and security is bigger here than in any other area of the DSS, period.
Hmm. Hmm.
Agreed.
And so we got to resist doing, Coop talked about folks looking for the cheapest, easiest way to do it. We need to resist the urge to squint and look at what is the most way that I could just narrowly plausibly say I'm compliant. We need to not forget that in the merchant eligibility or in the examples in the DSS, that you're supposed to be showing that you're not susceptible to the attacks. Okay, it doesn't say, and if it gives examples of SRI and content security policy, those are three different things listed. The
Yeah.
CSP, the SRI, and that it's not susceptible. So what? 2 out of 3 is okay? Well, by that logic, how about 1 out of 3? Are we good with just CSP? Are we good with just SRI? You're purposefully shutting your eye to like, look, prove it's not susceptible.
Hmm. Hmm.
Okay,
Hmm.
if you can't take 1 out of 3, you can't take 2 out of 3.
Yeah,
That's
yeah.
right.
So
I think that's a good seg into the next topic that I want to get on, right, as we move along. But could anything on the, clarion call, from here's your soapbox moment.
Yeah, it's a quick moment. It's just what Steve said. Basically, what I tell my clients is, look, if you want to scope out your e-commerce web stuff as SAC A, then you need to fully be eligible. And in order to be eligible for that SAC A, even though the council changed it and dropped those two requirements, you need to read that part that says, can you prove that your site, not your
Yeah,
payment page, your
yeah,
site, and boy, talk about a word that people are interpreting. Can you prove to me that it's not susceptible to attacks? And if I
yeah,
get a lot of hemming and hawing, Steve, I just send them to you guys. All the
yeah,
companies that I know, I give them a list. Look, they can all help you
yeah,
get one because unless you do and you can't prove to me that you're meeting that criteria, I'm not going to give you the scope reduction.
yeah.
Because to me, the SAC A is the big reward. Once you meet all that criteria, that's the reward. You get to scope that part of your payment channels using a SAC A.
Well, let's segue into that then, right? So here's the next question: like, how did SAC A, impact focus, and what really has it meant, for the security of the e-commerce ecosystem, and I would say, what we've seen, at least if you can attribute part of the low adoption rate, what we've seen is it had, a big impact on, the safety of the ecosystem. But let's unpack for a minute like what did happen. We're the inside baseball guys on this one, and I think it's sometimes a I take it for granted that people are reading everything that comes out and the referring documents that refer to the referring documents that refer to the document that they referred to. We're from the Judeo's People's Front, not the People's Front of Judea kind of city. It's a Monty Python joke, but yeah, I think let's start with what happened, right? So. Okay, so we were all cooking and everybody was going, we're gonna tackle this problem, right? And it's January of last year, and this announcement comes out changing SAC-A eligibility criteria. And it kicked in April, right as the mandate was kicking in for eSkimming controls, and it only changed scope for SAC-A, so it was only related to whether or not you're reporting under a self-assessment questionnaire and whether or not it's specific to the e-commerce environment, right? It was supposedly came out of this massive group task force, but that wasn't actually a product of that effort. I was on the task force, so I know I can say that, and they can yell at me later. But what happened was they added this eligibility language to the SAC-A, and they said we're removing requirement 643 and 11.6.1 for payment page security and the TRA, the 1231 targeted risk analysis supporting 11.6.1. Okay. But we've added more eligibility criteria for the SAC-A, and that addition is, to add that sentence you guys were just talking about, confirm your site is not susceptible to attacks from scripts that could affect the merchant's e-commerce system. And so basically what they said is, if you're SAC-A eligible, right, you don't have to do 643 and 11.6.1, so long as you can confirm that your site's not susceptible to attack, which I don't know how you can do without doing 11.3.6.1 or 643 and 11.6.1, or at least having some controls in place, right? But that every other merchant, still had to maintain 643 and 11.6.1 if you're not reporting on a SAC-A, and that you had to move forward. Now, I think right there, it froze thinking and said, well, wait, am I SAC-A, not SAC-A? Should I be SAC-A? Do I move to SAC-A? Maybe I can be SAC-A. Let me look at this new eligibility criteria, and then it kind of like didn't de-emphasize scope, right? And then they came out, I'll get through this slide. They came out and they basically changed it all because people were going, my head is spinning. And with this 1588 said, well, hang on, let's provide some clarity. What we mean by that is, in order to be SAC-A eligible and prove your site's not susceptible, okay, got my animal drum roll, please. You can use techniques such as 643 and 11.6.1, or you can go to your TPSP, and if they tell you that if you implement, your payment page embed the form per their instructions, right, and they can assure that your site's not susceptible to attacks, then you're good to go. So wait, it's like, do we do 643, not do 643? Do I turn to my TPSP? How can my TPSP say my site's not susceptible to attacks if they only have visibility in the payment page? What the hell do I do, right? And so, I mean, how much of an impact do you guys think that made on people's thinking, or if somebody's on this call and they're like, am I
Not
not?
enough.
Like, yeah,
Not enough at all. By the way, Steve,
Not
I
enough.
want to call out your kindness since we're talking about third-party solutions to indicate that the change in eligibility that moved 643.11.6.1 to being options for eligibility instead of in the SAQ happened within days of the first of three payment processors that offer such an involved solution of them actually releasing it.
yeah,
Coincidence?
yeah.
I think not.
So, but here's the thing, guys. This is language that those of us old heads here, Coop, I'm with you. I'm going to call myself an old head.
We're seasoned.
This is language familiar to us with the difference between point of sale devices, BIP, and the much better, much smaller scoped reporting for point-to-point encryption devices, which require a solution, a whole solution, not just one technology that gets you that scope reduction, including fully implementing the PIM, the instructions.
Mm-hmm.
So one, if you're wondering if your solution on your website qualifies, if it's the same iframes you've had for 4 or more years now, the answer is no. The solutions did not exist. Iframes are functional. They are not very great for security.
Mm-hmm.
Such solutions come again from only 3 providers right now, and they still offer their legacy iframes too. So don't confuse the name with the solution. And 3, you better be ready to show your QSA. And frankly, if you're doing a self-attestation, just save yourself good security by saying, well, then there must be very precise instructions to follow, and we better follow them. Mm-hmm. You're missing any of that. You just have legacy iframes, and you don't get to say you're not susceptible to attack.
Mm-hmm. That's right.
Yeah. Cool.
That's right. Yeah, you don't get to say it. And the thing that I think, so the other part of this, that when you were first bringing this up, Stephen, is the fact that people saw it and they went, "Oh, I don't have to do those two. That's great." And then they threw their hands up and they're like, "Woo!" And then they were telling me like, So this is all done. I don't have to mess with this. And I was like, well, we need to have a conversation. And I set up conferences with all my clients at that point and individually told them all, listen, as your QSA, it's up to me to use independent judgment. When I used to train the QSAs, we taught that
Mhm.
a QSA needs to use independent judgment. My independent judgment tells me that you can't just sit on your laurels and say,
Yeah.
whoa, we're done. You need to prove to me once again, have you followed the TPSP's instructions? Does the
Yeah.
TPSP stand by this? I'll tell you, one of my clients did something that I really love. I'll never tell you who the client was ever, 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 but they got a lawyer involved and they wrote up some legalese in their
Ah,
agreement with the third party payment processor. And they
yeah.
basically pegged it and they're big enough with the third party payment processor accepted it. And basically, in that document, it says if there's an e-skim, buddy, this is on you because we
Wow.
followed your directions and did everything you told us. So I
Wow.
thought that was pretty cool. But that's kind of the extreme where you're going to
That's an
push your.
extreme, and it's an extreme, and it's something I don't know. I mean, they must
That's
be a
right.
major client for
It's a
that
huge, it's a
PSP.
Exactly.
it's a huge
Yeah.
client, and they get
Yeah.
Big
all
to
their money.
refuse.
Yeah.
Everything they do is ecom, and so
Yeah. I'll tell you
and
why
so they
that
had to
that
get
can,
it.
why that concerns me is this whole thing, right? I think from our perspective flies in the face of the way attacks actually work, and it's going to be a
That's
good
right.
segue. Going to be a good segue into this controls conversation, right? But you know, I'll say it, and I'll say it all day long, and I'll say it next week when I talk, to everybody out there, and they can hate me for it. The DSS currently has it wrong. It's just got it wrong. The scope is there's an issue with the scope. There's an issue with the understanding of how these attacks work. There's an issue with an understanding of what the adversary is able to do when they've compromised script on a website, in thinking that payment page security alone equals no skimming capability. And we discovered something yesterday that we'll put a report out on hopefully tomorrow. Scott will keep me honest on that one, tomorrow or Monday. And even more so than sort of this example. It's a complete redirect, right? So sites that are effectively fully outsourcing payment page to off my infrastructure, full redirect. Those sites being compromised, and the click for checkout is taking them to a command and control, or to an adversary's page. So the redirect's working, but it's not stopping e-skimming because the compromise happened on the parent page, and the parent page is referring out to the bad guy's domain. So there's issues there, right? And so I think there's issues with scope I want to get into, and then there's issues with controls too, right? So I'm gonna keep us moving because I want to maybe about 15 minutes from now open it up to Q&A. The controls conversation. Okay. What are you guys seeing based on guidance in the DSS? And is it creating, a false sense of security? And I'll just start it off on this one, right? The DSS does not prescribe, hang on, my slide's not going to move again. Yeah. The DSS does not prescribe what you have to do in terms of the control, right? And it doesn't, I think there's very few areas where it actually like specifically calls out, right? It gives good practices and it gives examples. But the way our brains work and the way people look at these types of things, if it explicitly calls out these reference examples, they must mean that if I just use those controls, I should be in good shape. And so, I think I counted it this morning 11 times. CSP is mentioned, content security policy is mentioned, probably about the same number of times that SRI is mentioned. They're right here in the DSS. If you went to page whatever it is, right, you'd find it. And it's, basically saying, hey, use content security policy, prevent unauthorized content, being substituted for the payment page, use SRI, to validate that the script hasn't been tampered with. Because I guess we're thinking about, sort of the complexity of the modern web environment as if it was probably 20 years ago, in terms of its complexity. And I think there's a real issue and a real misinterpretation that probably people see when they read this about these approaches. My perspective, and what we have to say to the world, is that CSP and SRI just aren't controls for e-skimming. Their CSP, is basically built on the notion of an allow list or a whitelist, and it says I'm going to allow known partners to run on my website, and my tag manager partner is Google Tag Manager, or my video partner is, Acme Corp, or I want the metapixel on my page. And they're allowed to run. That's it. Fail open, right? And so what it, the reference example of CSP, as sort of like a guidance here. The problem with that is that it is actually the trusted third party network that's being compromised. So, it's not like, we're talking about like a first party compromise where they're breaking into the server infrastructure and they're deploying code that shouldn't exist. They're compromising scripts that are allowed to run in a CSP environment. So they're static. They can't track. They can't, basically attack this problem. And we were on that guidance task force, and 80 people were on that. We were all basically saying this should be removed from the DSS, at least as heavily of an example as it is. Even if it were to work, it would be massively, complex updates, all this breakage, all these kind of things. And SRI is the opposite. SRI, you need a hash. And so you got to hash out every script that's going to run in order to say, is it allowable or not allowable? And so that often, breaks things if you're trying to run hashes against dynamic scripts that are like updating by the minute, second, millisecond, kind of thing. We had one client that was looking at 47,000 changes to scripts a month across 20 websites. Anyway, I think it's misleading. I think we need to call to action to remove the stuff, from the reference example. But what do you guys think? What are you hearing? What are you seeing? What am I crazy? Am I just screaming at the old man shouting at the clouds?
A lot of shoutings needed. Controls that don't control. At the end of the day, I've had more follow-up interviews with my clients this year for this than like anything I've done. And one of the final interview with them is demonstrate to me the security value you're getting from this. You know, more common than anything else, if they're not using a solution like this, um, and they're rolling their own and they're using something like Report URI, it's like, okay, are you getting valid signal? How much noise? What have you actually detected in the form of an attack? Is that what you expected? And the pursuit of value within these things is a pretty hard one. Um, the audience may be surprised to know there are a lot of ways that not getting value was was pursued. Some have tried saying, "Well, we're testing our non-production environment," as if anybody's ever seen a non-production environment that is similar and has especially the third-party interactions. Um, Using synthetic testing instead of all sessions. How likely is it that your synthetic testing done only from your closets, your pops around the world, are going to be interacted with by anybody? You're unlikely to get data. Obviously, we're talking about controls, and if it's based on CSP, how are folks finding out about interactions after page load? Did anybody or the DSS ever say that page load testing satisfies this? They didn't say. Why are we squinting to say so? Um, but I guess, and there's too many examples more that could be gone to, but ultimately, garbage in, garbage out. If your reporting isn't adding value, can you really say you're not susceptible?
About
Absolutely.
that, I'm on mute. Yeah, I think one of the things that I like that you just brought up is almost like the tilting at windmills kind of process that people have been going through just to try and save themselves effort and time, and costing themselves effort, time, heartache, and and ultimately getting nowhere anyway in the long run, right? Coop, what are your thoughts, man?
Well, I mean, the thing is, Steve's exactly right. They're squinting, they're picking and choosing. The interpretation of this is a mess, and I think a lot of it, like I said, we've already hashed it over what the history was and why they changed the SAC, why or why not, so on and so forth. The sad thing is, CSP and SRI, these are static tools. Are they okay? Yeah. Can you call them a best practice? I would say it's a good practice. I don't know that it's a best practice. A best practice ought to be the best, and this sure as hell isn't the best. So, I mean, I don't know. I don't want to wordsmith. The good thing. So now I'll plug the good side for the council. They do listen. Sometimes it takes time and a lot of effort, but I think as long as all of us are united on this, and we are, in Fort Worth at the community meeting this year, everybody I spoke to, including many of your competitors, they have the same viewpoint that we all do. We all get this. And so the bottom line is we need to keep working to get the council to understand that they should, really explain what CSP and SRI can and can't do versus putting it in as a good practice. Because, like Steve said, the clients, the merchants are just squinting. Oh,
Yeah.
I can do CSP. I'm good. I'm good. I'm good. It's one
Yeah.
bullet of those three, as you said, Steve.
Yeah. And
Right.
I in my zeal to, sling mud, I would say, like, at least we're moving in the right direction. But is with everything, everything has to evolve, right?
It
And
does.
we need to even our compliance focus cannot remain static. We can't, put something in place. It's crazy to me to think that it's already been 4 years. Like, my daughter has already graduated high school, gone through college, and she's graduating now since this came up. I mean, like, it doesn't sound like that long, but I mean, like, we're pushing half a decade. And I know, through my conversations with the council, this is a year where they want to be more fluid in update and not, just wait for the major, point, or even like the big, the five to come. So hopefully that can happen. I think, for those on the call that are QSAs, because I know we got a good mix there. We got merchants, QSAs, PSPs, right? I would say take this to the gear meeting conversations, right? Go in, walk all elements of what we talked about today: adoption rates, guidance issues, right? Controls issues, even like, how commonality amongst assessments, has got to be something, right? So that there's a level playing field between merchants on what you guys are asking. So it's a clarion call for there, and for the merchants on the call, hopefully what you're hearing is avoid some pitfalls and, go for the best practice, and don't just let compliance guide what you need to do. And so that, for me, that's a good segue into the next conversation, which is scope. Okay. And we got maybe 5 minutes on this one, right? And then I want to just basically turn it into any Q&A. So for the folks on the call, if you got questions, start thinking of them, but here, let's talk about scope, right? Is the scope correct? And what does research tell us about, the scope, response, and whether or not, keeping our focus the way it is going to work? Okay. And again, I'll start it off, right? So from our perspective, hang on, this damn slide. Sorry, guys. Not just from our perspective. Well, I wanted to make sure there are other voices in here. Like, so you got TrustedSec, you got Source Defense, you got, this is coming from Security Metrics. They do PFI work, PCI forensic investigation work. Obviously, they also have a tool like we do. So, I'm all about, sort of raising the ship, and with all, waters, whatever they call it, tides, all tides raise ships. I don't care. I'm not from a vendor perspective. I'm from a purist perspective. We got to solve this problem. Security Metrics is saying, 2,000 of the investigations that they've done involving eSkimming, 100% of the time, it was not a problem with a compromise or a malicious script running on a hosted payment page. It was somewhere else in the site. It was the referring page, as you might hear it referred to, I think in the DSS language. The attack was site-wide. The compromise was upstream from checkout, and the payment page itself is not where the skim happened, right? I mentioned this earlier. We discovered it just yesterday. I will, put that blog out, and anybody on this call, I'll make sure you guys get it. We see evidence of site-wide attacks all the time. We see evidence of, malicious redirects. Checkout button is compromised, even where sites didn't even have any payment infrastructure embedded, right? And we're seeing more and more and more of this, especially with like redirects towards, mirror image payment providers. There's a lot of pixel perfect, work that the adversaries are doing. even regionalization, things of that nature to make it really, really convincing to the consumer. We are seeing these kind of attacks. This is in the report you can download. I won't go too much into it because I want to get the conversation opened up. But like we're seeing these types of attacks where, a fake payment method is implemented in the UI. And so checkout UI looks legitimate. The payment flow is what's been compromised, not the payment page. And it's a forced redirect, to an adversary's, compromised domain, right? Or to the domain where they're going to compromise the card credential or the card details. So, all right. So back to the people that matter. So Steve, thoughts, Coop, thoughts, on scope, where we are and what you're advising clients and whether or not anybody's listening to that.
Well, hopefully people are understanding that, you know, we're finding that the table stakes to this conversation is more conversations than with any other part of the DSS. I'm averaging 3 interviews for this, whereas others are we've been doing it for years with just one. And I've had 5 interviews with them, to get again to that final point of are you getting the value that you can tell that you're blocking attacks. Um, I probably just want to reinforce kind of the basics. Like we understand the DSS without if you don't squint and look for the easy way out, the DSS and the merchant eligibility is saying for the site, not just for payment pages. But even without that, we intuit from what you just said that the attacks are coming from other pages, from the same source or a trusted same source, and that we've got to apply this to the whole site. Do the things that make sense. Do question every single third party for the whole site. Are they necessary? Obviously, we're saying CSP isn't enough, but yeah, at least block things that aren't the necessary ones. Actively manage all of these things. We want run side controls, but yeah, block the loading. The just please look at the best practices per third party you're allowing on your site. CSP directives can get a lot more restrictive than domain level. There are often nonces available. There are sometimes signed files and signatures available. You must know that you're doing the most available to restrict. And then yeah, you really should be preventing stuff happening at runtime too. Typically in those solutions. Oh, my last little bit here. I've heard a lot of pushback about folks questioning, do I really want to trust adding 2 lines of code for like source defense and your competitors? It's a similar solution in that you need a few lines of code. This isn't new, guys. We did this for New Relic in 2008. We knew that it was important to do performance and reliability and all our reliability engineering and to really know what was going on. We added 2 lines of code. It was revolutionary. It absolutely revolutionized the ability to manage systems and application performance. That was a long time ago. This is the same implementation.
I would add to that like you already the idea of adding 2 lines of code is happening that to create the problem. That's where your third party services are coming into play, and you're using tag managers and things of that nature for your marketing people to just simply press and go, right?
Right.
Yeah. So it's like
It,
we're talking
it's
about the
it's
same implementation getting us into this mess, right? To get us out of it. And I would say, and I do like, sort of to keep it, sort of across the industry. All of us at the vendor level are doing different things, some similar things. We're all doing things that we think are intended to try and make life better and more secure. So we do have mission as our purpose. And the mission is, again, all floating tides raise all boats, right? I don't care what you do, you should do something. And the difference between isolation down to payment page and site wide is nominal. It's definitely nominal in terms of the implementation side of things, because you're already mucking around and deploying the code anyway. And it's very nominal in terms of like the price differential. So it's almost like the limitation of scope it's like a fool's errand, right? But it seems like we're spending a lot on those. trying to navigate around this whole problem. Coop, you got some parting thoughts on that before we open up some questions?
Yeah, just one quick parting thought is we're talking about the classic balance between security and user friendliness, and that's always web people always go nuts over that. So it's an old chestnut. We'll be fighting it for as long as I'll be around. And it's just one of those things, the sales folks, they want to put every script out there and make every, they want dancing people and lights and great stuff because the user experience and the security guy is like, yeah, but that's a mess. And so it's the same deal. The problem is that people are not striking the right balance, and they really need to start looking at security heavier than just compliance. And we had already spoken about that. So I think we should take a couple questions and see where people are floating
Let's
right
see if
now.
there are any out there, or if we've just stumped the crowd with too much controversy here.
Too
Uh,
TMI, huh?
we've gotten everything out, or they're out there writing
I'm
letters
sure
to the council,
I'm
trying to
sure
get
there's
it.
QSAs squirming, listening to us going,
Yeah.
actually, I've got juicier examples than what I've heard today.
So, do we have any questions from the floor here? I want to make sure you get your thoughts and concerns and opinions out if we've got them. And maybe while we're waiting to see if anything manifests, I'll say, I'm always available for communication and contact. If you have questions on the subject, you can just drop me a line at steve@sourcedefense.com. Super easy, steve@sourcedefense.com. I don't know, Coop and Steve, if you guys want to share contact details, you can as well. No pressure on that front. But
Yeah, you can actually reach me at coop@trustedsec.com. And it's a lot easier to remember. It's a four-letter word that won't get you in trouble.
and
Mine is I guess, is this appearing on screen? Steve.Maxwell at TrustedSec.com.
cool.